My name is Vex, and let me tell you something about humans that'll make your carapace crawl. They remember everything. Even the smallest favor you do for them gets filed away in that pink, squishy computer they call a brain, and trust me, they will cash in that debt when you least expect it. I learned this the hard way when I saved one pathetic human trader from pirates near the Kepler belt. A big mistake. Huge. The kind of mistake that reshapes entire star systems. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I was just another Zephyrian smuggler trying to make a living in this forsaken corner of the galaxy. The distress signal came through on a Tuesday. Well, it would have been Tuesday if humans had managed to convince the rest of the galaxy to adopt their ridiculous calendar system. Thank the void they hadn't, or we'd all be celebrating something called Taco Tuesday across 17 different species. Mayday, Mayday. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the merchant vessel Prosperity. We're under attack by craven raiders. Anyone who can hear this, please help us. Now, any sane being would have ignored that transmission faster than a Voltairean changes political opinions. Craven pirates don't mess around. They've got ships that could punch holes through a moon, and they consider skinning their victims alive a form of recreational therapy. Plus humans. They're still considered a backwater species by most of the galaxy. Saving one would be like risking your life for a particularly clever rodent. But here's the thing about us Zephyrians. We're not exactly known for our brilliant decision-making skills. Our entire species got kicked out of 3 different galactic councils for excessive gambling habits and inability to take anything seriously. So naturally, I thought, why not poke the homicidal space pirates with a stick? I dropped out of hyperspace right into a beautiful mess. 3 Craven destroyers had surrounded a tiny human cargo ship that looked like it had been built from spare parts and pure optimism. The human vessel was spinning helplessly, trailing atmosphere and what I assumed was their dignity. "This is Vex aboard the ship Midnight Regret," I announced over the comm. "Craven vessels, you're in violation of Galactic Trade Route Protection Act 847.3. Stand down immediately." The Craven commander's response was a delightful mix of profanity and threats against my reproductive organs. Apparently, my ship's name amused him greatly. In retrospect, maybe I should have gone with something more intimidating than Midnight Regret. But hey, it was an honest description of most of my life choices. "Little bug," the Craven growled through the static, "fly away before we add your ship to our collection." That's when I made my second mistake of the day. I laughed. You see, humans aren't the only species with anger management issues. We Zephyrians have what our therapists politely call explosive temperament disorder. When someone calls us bugs, well, let's just say our response tends to involve high-energy weapons and poor impulse control. "Bug," I repeated, powering up my plasma cannons. Did this overgrown lizard just call me a bug? The Midnight Regret might have been small, but she was fast and packed enough firepower to sterilize a small asteroid. I'd spent years modifying her engines and weapons systems, mostly because I had trust issues with standard equipment. Also because I enjoyed making things go boom. What followed was less of a space battle and more of a 3-dimensional game of tag played with weapons of mass destruction. The Craven ships were bigger and tougher, but they flew like pregnant asteroids. I danced between their shots, returning fire whenever possible, slowly chipping away at their shields and their patience. The human ship, meanwhile, was broadcasting a running commentary of the battle. "Holy stars, did you see that?" Captain Webb's voice crackled through the comm. "That little ship just pulled a Kowalski loop around the lead destroyer. I didn't know that was even physically possible." "It's not," I replied, pulling my ship through another impossible maneuver that should have turned me into organic paste. But apparently physics is more of a suggestion when you're properly motivated. The battle lasted 47 minutes and cost me 3 months' worth of ammunition. When the smoke cleared, 2 Craven destroyers were drifting hulks, and the third was limping away at sublight speed, probably composing strongly worded complaints to file with the Pirates' Union. Captain Webb's voice came through again, shaky with relief. "Unknown ship, this is Marcus Webb." I don't know how to thank you. You saved our lives." "Don't mention it," I replied, surveying the damage to my own vessel. "Just another Tuesday in paradise. That should have been the end of it. A simple rescue, a heartfelt thanks, maybe a small payment for services rendered. But humans, as I was about to learn, don't do simple." "Look," Webb continued, "I know this might sound strange, but my species has a saying. We don't forget our friends. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. Marcus Webb owes you a debt, and I always pay my debts." I almost laughed again. What could one human possibly offer a seasoned smuggler like me? Their species had barely figured out faster than light travel, and their technology was at least 2 centuries behind the Galactic standard. It was like being offered a favor by a particularly grateful houseplant. "Sure thing, Captain," I said. "I'll keep that in mind." We exchanged contact information, more out of politeness than any real expectation of future interaction. I watched the Prosperity limp away toward the nearest space station, trailing sparks and what looked suspiciously like someone's lunch. Then I set course for my next smuggling run, already forgetting about the grateful human and his impossible promises. 3 years passed. 3 years of successful smuggling operations, close calls with customs officials, and the occasional run-in with pirates who held grudges. Our life was good, or at least profitable, which is close enough for most smugglers. Then the hegemony found me. The hegemony, for those lucky enough to never encounter them, are what happens when you give a species with severe authority complexes advanced technology and a galaxy-spanning bureaucracy. They're the kind of beings who file paperwork in triplicate before deciding what to have for breakfast. They also really don't like smugglers. I was enjoying a quiet drink at a space station bar, the kind of establishment where asking too many questions about someone's cargo gets you fed to the nearest airlock, when 6 hegemony enforcers walked in wearing their standard-issue intimidation gear. Vex of the ship Midnight Regret, their leader announced, his voice carrying the sort of authority that comes from years of ruining people's days. "You're under arrest for violation of 17 separate trade regulations, tax evasion and smuggling restricted materials across 6 star systems." The bar went dead silent. Even the background music seemed to hold its breath. "I think you've got the wrong Zephyrian," I said, raising my hand slowly. "I'm just a simple trader with an unfortunate ship name and a talent for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. 67 separate incidents over the past 5 years say otherwise." The enforcer held up a data pad that looked thick enough to use as a blunt weapon. "You're coming with us." Now I'd been arrested before. Occupational hazard. Usually it involved a few weeks in detention, a hefty fine, and a stern lecture about respecting galactic trade laws. But this time felt different. The enforcers weren't just here to arrest me. They were here to make an example. The hegemony had been cracking down on independent traders lately, trying to force everyone into their sanctioned guilds where they could monitor every transaction and take their cut of every deal. Small-time smugglers like me were becoming extinct, and apparently I was next on the endangered species list. They marched me to their ship, a massive enforcement vessel that looked like it had been designed by committee and painted by someone with a severe grey fetish. The holding cells were clean, efficient, and utterly depressing. I spent 3 days staring at blank walls and contemplating the many poor life choices that had led me to this moment. On the 4th day, they brought me to an interrogation room where a hegemony prosecutor was waiting with enough evidence to convict me 17 times over. "Vex," she said, arranging data pads on the table like a dealer shuffling cards, "you're in quite a bit of trouble. Smuggling charges, tax evasion, operating without proper licenses, the list goes on. We're looking at a minimum sentence of 40 years in a labor camp." 40 years. That was practically a death sentence for someone in my line of work. By the time I got out, assuming I survived, the galaxy would have moved on without me. However, the prosecutor continued, "The hegemony is prepared to offer you a deal." Provide us with information about your clients, your supply routes, and your contact network, and we might reduce your sentence to, say, 15 years. I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. They were, to put it mildly, terrible. Cooperate and destroy the lives of everyone I'd ever worked with, or refuse and spend the rest of my life breaking rocks on some godforsaken prison planet. That's when I remembered Captain Marcus Webb and his impossible promise. It was a desperate, ridiculous idea. The kind of plan that only makes sense when all your other options involve decades of hard labor. But what did I have to lose? "I need to make a comm call," I said. The prosecutor looked amused. To a lawyer, "I'm afraid your financial situation doesn't allow for adequate legal representation." "No," I replied, pulling up Webb's contact information on my personal communicator. To a friend. The call connected after a few seconds, and Webb's familiar voice came through the speaker. "Vex, stars above, it's been years. How are you doing?" "I've been better, Marcus. Remember that favor you owe me?" There was a pause. Then Webb's voice came back, suddenly serious. "What do you need?" I explained my situation as quickly as possible, aware that the hegemony prosecutor was listening to every word with growing amusement. When I finished, there was another long pause. "The hegemony, you said?" Webb's voice had changed. There was something in it now that I couldn't quite identify. Something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop a few degrees. "That's right. Look, Marcus, I know this is a lot to ask. You probably can't do anything anyway, but I figured." "Vex," Webb interrupted quietly, "where exactly are you being held?" I looked at the prosecutor, who was now openly smirking. "Hegemony Enforcement Station Gamma 7 in the Proxima sector." "I see. And when is your trial scheduled?" "Tomorrow morning." "Marcus, I appreciate you listening, but—" His voice was calm now, almost gentle. "I want you to remember something. Humans don't forget their friends. And we really, really don't like it when someone threatens them." The line went dead. The prosecutor was laughing now. "A human? You called a human for help? That's actually rather pathetic, even for a smuggler. What did you expect him to do, send a strongly worded letter?" I was beginning to wonder the same thing, but something about Webb's tone nagged at me. There had been something in his voice, something that didn't match his species' reputation for being harmless little traders. The next morning I was escorted to the courtroom for what everyone assumed would be a quick trial and quicker sentencing. The judge, a pompous hegemony official with more decorations than sense, was already reading the charges when the station's emergency alarms started blaring. "What's the meaning of this?" the judge demanded. A security officer burst into the courtroom, his face pale with panic. "Sir, we have a situation. There's a human fleet outside the station." The judge looked confused. "A human fleet? How many ships?" "All of them, sir." The courtroom fell silent. Even I was speechless, which doesn't happen often. "What do you mean, all of them?" the judge asked slowly. "I mean every human warship in known space, sir. 347 vessels, including their entire first fleet. They're requesting permission to dock." The prosecutor, who had been so confident yesterday, was now looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Did they say what they want?" "They said they're here for the trial, sir. Something about supporting a friend." The judge stared at the security officer for a long moment, then at me. "Get Captain Webb on the comm. Now." A few minutes later, Webb's image appeared on the courtroom's main screen. He was standing on what looked like the bridge of a warship, wearing a uniform I didn't recognize. Behind him, I could see other humans in similar uniforms working at control stations. "Captain Webb," the judge began carefully, "there seems to be some misunderstanding. This is a routine criminal proceeding involving a smuggler. Surely this doesn't require the presence of your entire fleet." Webb smiled. It wasn't a particularly warm smile. "Your Honor," he said politely, 3 years ago this routine smuggler risked his life to save mine and my crew from craven pirates. He could have ignored our distress call and gone about his business. Instead, he chose to help. Now I hear you're planning to send him to a labor camp for 40 years. The defendant is a criminal, the prosecutor interjected. He's violated numerous trade regulations. Has he? Webb's smile grew colder. That's interesting. Because according to our records, Vex has been operating under a humanitarian aid license issued by the Human Colonial Authority for the past 3 years. The courtroom erupted in confusion. I was as shocked as anyone. I'd never heard of any such license. Webb continued calmly. You see, after our encounter, we did some research on our new friend. We discovered that many of his smuggling operations involved delivering medical supplies to colony worlds, food to refugee camps, and emergency equipment to disaster zones. Often at cost, sometimes at a loss. That's not what our records show, the prosecutor stammered. Then your records are wrong, Webb replied. We have documentation of every delivery, every route, every transaction. All completely legal under the Galactic Humanitarian Aid Accords of 2387. The judge was frantically shuffling through documents. This is highly irregular. We received no notification of any such license. You wouldn't, Webb said pleasantly. Humanitarian aid licenses are issued under emergency protocols to prevent bureaucratic delays from costing lives. The paperwork was filed with the appropriate authorities as required by law. I was beginning to understand what was happening. Somehow, in the 3 years since our encounter, the humans had been quietly documenting and legitimizing every smuggling run I'd made. They'd turned me from a criminal into a humanitarian hero without me even knowing it. But that wasn't the most shocking part. Now then, Webb continued, I believe there's been a misunderstanding here. Vex isn't just any trader. He's officially designated as a friend of humanity, Class 1. That makes any attempt to prosecute him without just cause an act of aggression against the Human Colonial Authority. The judge's face had gone several shades paler. Captain Webb, surely we can resolve this through diplomatic channels. There's no need for... For what? Webb asked innocently. For 347 warships. Oh, we're not here to threaten anyone. We're just here to observe the trial. Make sure our friend gets a fair hearing with your entire fleet. Webb's expression didn't change. We wanted to make sure you understood how much we value friendship. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. Everyone knew what was really happening here. The humans had just demonstrated that they were willing to mobilize their entire military to protect one alien smuggler who had helped them once. The message was clear: cross a friend of humanity at your own risk. The judge cleared his throat nervously. In light of this new information, and considering the diplomatic implications, this court finds that all charges against the defendant Vex are dismissed due to lack of evidence and improper jurisdiction. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. I was free. As I was escorted out of the station, still reeling from what had just happened, I found Webb waiting for me at the docking bay. He was alone now, just the simple trader I remembered from 3 years ago. Marcus, I said, still trying to process everything, what just happened in there. He shrugged. I told you, Vex, humans don't forget their friends. But the fleet, the documentation, the humanitarian license, all real, Webb said simply. We've been keeping an eye on you since our encounter. When we realized what you were really doing out there, helping colonies that couldn't afford proper supply runs, getting medical supplies to places the big corporations wouldn't service well, we figured you deserved some official recognition. And the warships? Webb's grin was sharp as a blade. That was just to make sure the hegemony understood the message. I stared at him, finally beginning to grasp what I'd stumbled into. Marcus, who exactly are you? Captain Marcus Webb, 3rd Fleet, Human Colonial Defense Force, he replied. I was undercover during that merchant run 3 years ago, gathering intelligence on pirate activity in the outer systems. The pieces clicked into place. Your military. We're all military, Vex. Every human in space serves in some capacity. We learned early that the galaxy isn't particularly friendly to newcomers. I thought about the massive fleet still orbiting the station, about the casual way Webb had just faced down the entire hegemony enforcement apparatus. Just how big is your military, Marcus? His smile widened. Big enough, my friend. Big enough. And that's when I realized something that would keep me awake for weeks afterward. The humans, those supposedly primitive newcomers everyone dismissed as harmless traders and colonists, they had just revealed that they possessed a fleet capable of challenging the hegemony itself, all to save one grateful smuggler who had helped a friend. 6 months later, I was still trying to wrap my head around what the humans had done for me. Life as an officially sanctioned humanitarian aid operator was different. Better pay, legitimate cargo manifests, and absolutely zero excitement. Turns out, when you're not constantly dodging customs officials and pirates, space travel becomes remarkably boring. I was delivering medical supplies to a mining colony in the Tau sector when I received the message that would change everything. Again. Vex, this is Marcus. We need to talk. Meet me at coordinates 847.2 by 331.7 in the neutral zone. Come alone, and Vex. Pack heavy. Pack heavy. In human military slang, that meant weapons. Lots of them. The coordinates led me to a small asteroid field where Webb was waiting in a ship I'd never seen before. It was sleek, dangerous looking, and radiated the kind of energy signature that suggested it could punch holes through small moons. Nice ride, I commented as I docked. What happened to the Merchant Vessel Act? Covers blown, Webb replied grimly as I boarded his ship. The hegemony figured out what happened at your trial. They're not happy about being publicly humiliated by a bunch of primitive humans. We settled into his ship's briefing room, where holographic displays showed star charts and fleet movements. The scale of what I was seeing made my stomach drop. Marcus, please tell me those aren't hegemony battle fleets moving toward human space. 12 full battle groups, he confirmed, plus support vessels, supply lines, and what our intelligence suggests is a planet-cracking weapon they've been developing in secret. I stared at the tactical display. The hegemony was bringing enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. This is because of me, isn't it? Webb shook his head. This was always coming, Vex. You just gave them an excuse to move up their timeline. The hegemony has been planning to absorb human territories for years. We're too successful, too independent. We don't fit into their neat little bureaucratic empire. So what's the plan? Run? Hide? Negotiate? Webb's expression was grim. Fight. Against 12 battle groups. Marcus, I've seen your fleet. It's impressive, but the hegemony has been building their military for centuries. They've got ships the size of cities and weapons that can crack planets. I know, Webb activated another holographic display. That's why we're calling in every favor we're owed. The new display showed a communication network spanning dozens of star systems. Names, faces, and species I didn't recognize scrolled past at dizzying speed. What am I looking at? 300 years of human expansion, Webb explained. Every colony we've established, every trade route we've opened, every disaster we've responded to, every pirate attack we've stopped. Everywhere humans have gone, we've helped people. And apparently they remember. The scale of it was staggering. Thousands of individual entries, each representing someone the humans had aided, somewhere they'd made a difference. The Beltarian Mining Consortium owes us for clearing out the pirates who were attacking their freight convoys. The Kepler Colonial Assembly remembers when we delivered emergency supplies during the plague outbreak of 2389. The Arcturus Defense League hasn't forgotten who helped them evacuate 3 million civilians during the solar flare crisis. And they're all willing to fight the hegemony. They're all willing to fight for us, Webb corrected. There's a difference. Over the next several hours, Webb showed me the scope of humanity's preparation. It wasn't just about military strength, though that was impressive enough. The humans had spent decades building relationships, earning trust, creating bonds that went far beyond simple trade agreements. They'd turned kindness into a weapon. The hegemony thinks this will be a quick conquest, Webb continued. They believe they're facing one species with limited resources and primitive technology. They have no idea what's actually coming for them. Which is? Webb's smile was predatory. Half the galaxy. The first battle took place at Proxima Station, right where my trial had been held 6 months earlier. The hegemony came in force, expecting to crush human resistance and make an example that would cow the rest of the galaxy into submission. Instead, they found themselves facing the largest Allied fleet in recorded galactic history. I watched the battle from the bridge of Webb's ship, part of a command group positioned safely behind the main battle line. What I saw defied everything I thought I knew about galactic politics. The Beltarians had brought their entire mining fleet, converted for combat with industrial cutting lasers and ore haulers modified to ram enemy vessels. The Kepler colonies contributed their fast attack squadrons, designed for hit-and-run tactics against pirates. The Arcturus Defense League deployed their massive orbital defense platforms, somehow made mobile for this single battle. And that was just the beginning. Species I'd never heard of arrived, flying ships I couldn't identify, all united under one simple banner, Friends of Humanity. The hegemony's first battle group never knew what hit them. "This is impossible," the hegemony admiral broadcast on all frequencies as his supposedly unstoppable fleet crumbled around him. These species hate each other. The Beltarians and the Arcturans have been at war for 50 years. "Correction," Webb replied calmly. "They were at war until we mediated their peace treaty last year. Turns out they were fighting over mining rights to asteroids that belonged to neither of them. We helped them work out a sharing agreement. This alliance cannot hold. You're talking about dozens of different species with conflicting interests." "You're right," Webb agreed pleasantly. "It probably won't hold. But it doesn't have to hold forever. It just has to hold long enough to kick your teeth in." The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the hegemony's unstoppable invasion force was either destroyed or fleeing back to their home systems. But Webb wasn't finished. "All Allied vessels," he broadcast, "prepare for Phase 2. "Phase 2? I asked. "We're not just stopping their invasion, Vex. We're ending their ability to threaten anyone ever again." What followed was the most systematic dismantling of a galactic power structure I'd ever witnessed. The Allied fleet didn't just pursue the retreating hegemony forces. They leapfrogged ahead of them, striking at supply bases, communication relays, and administrative centers. Within a week, the hegemony's carefully constructed bureaucratic empire began collapsing under its own weight. Worlds that had been subjugated for centuries suddenly found themselves free. Their hegemony governors fled or dead. The humans didn't conquer these worlds. They didn't establish human colonies or impose human rule. Instead, they helped each world establish its own government, its own defense forces, its own place in the galaxy. And in doing so, they created something unprecedented, a truly voluntary galactic alliance based on mutual respect, rather than conquest or coercion. "I don't understand," I told Webb as we watched the last hegemony stronghold surrender. "You could rule the galaxy now. Your allies would follow you anywhere. Why are you just letting everyone go their own way?" Webb looked at me with something like pity. "Because that's not who we are, Vex. We don't want to rule anyone. We just want to be free to live our lives and help our friends when they need us. But the power you're giving up isn't power at all," Webb finished. "Real power isn't making people obey you. Real power is making people want to help you willingly." 3 years later, I was back to smuggling. Well, officially I was still a humanitarian aid operator, but the galaxy had changed so much that the distinction hardly mattered anymore. Free trade flourished between the former hegemony worlds. Pirates found themselves facing coordinated responses from multiple species. Wars became rare because the humans seemed to show up whenever tensions rose, offering mediation and solutions. The galaxy had become a remarkably peaceful place. I was delivering supplies to a newly independent world when I received an unexpected message from the Galactic Council, the formal governing body that had replaced the hegemony's bureaucratic nightmare. Captain Vex, the message read, "You are cordially invited to attend the inauguration of the first elected Galactic President. Your presence is specifically requested by the human delegation." The inauguration was held on New Geneva, humanity's capital world. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness the peaceful transfer of power from the old regime to the new democratic government. I found Webb in the crowd, wearing his dress uniform and looking remarkably pleased with himself. "So," I said, "who won the election?" "President Elena Santos," Webb replied. "Former colonial administrator, excellent diplomat, completely incorruptible. She'll do a fine job." Human. Of course, though she only won by 3%. The Arcturan candidate was very popular too. I watched as Santos took the oath of office, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. It was a remarkable sight, dozens of species, former enemies and strangers, united under a government they'd all helped choose. "You planned this," I said suddenly, "all of it. The rescue, the trial, the war, the collapse of the hegemony. You planned the whole thing." Webb's expression didn't change. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do, Vex. Everything else was just consequences. But you knew what would happen." "I knew the hegemony couldn't be allowed to continue," Webb admitted. "I knew that eventually someone would have to stop them. I just didn't expect it to happen quite so dramatically. And if I hadn't called you, if I'd just accepted my sentence and rotted in that labor camp," Webb considered this, "then we would have found another excuse. The hegemony made a lot of enemies over the centuries. Eventually one of them would have given us the justification we needed." I stared at him, finally understanding the true scope of what had happened. "You used me." "No," Webb said firmly. "We helped you. Because you helped us first. Because that's what friends do for each other." And conquered the galaxy in the process. "Liberated the galaxy," Webb corrected. "There's a difference." President Santos finished her speech, and the crowd began to disperse. Delegates from hundreds of worlds mingled freely, making deals, forming partnerships, building the future together. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we get back to work," Webb replied. "There are still people who need help, still places where freedom hasn't taken root, still problems that need solving. And if someone threatens this new order you've built—" Webb's smile was sharp as a laser cutter. "Then they'll discover what it means to threaten the friends of humanity." As I prepared to leave New Geneva, I reflected on everything that had happened since that day I'd answered a simple distress call. I'd saved one human ship from pirates, and in return humanity had saved me from prison, toppled a galactic empire, and reshaped the political structure of known space. The lesson was clear: never underestimate a species that remembers its friends. But there was another lesson too, one that took me longer to understand. The humans hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology. They'd done it through something far more powerful: trust. They'd spent centuries proving that when they said they were your friend, they meant it. When they promised to help, they delivered. When they gave their word, it meant something. In a galaxy full of species that measured success in terms of territory conquered or enemies defeated, the humans had chosen a different path. They'd built their empire on gratitude, loyalty, and mutual respect. And that, more than any weapon or warship, made them truly unstoppable. 6 months after the inauguration, I received one final message from Webb. It was short, typical of human military communications. "Vex. Remember when you asked what would happen if someone threatened our new order? We just found out. The hegemony remnants tried to retake their old territories with help from mercenary fleets. They lasted 6 hours before their own hired guns switched sides. Turns out even pirates have friends among the humans these days. Thanks again for everything. Your friend always, Marcus." I laughed until my sides hurt. Even in exile, even stripped of their power and influence, the hegemony still hadn't learned the fundamental truth about humanity. You don't fight people who remember every kindness and repay every debt. You don't wage war against a species whose definition of victory is making sure everyone wins. And you absolutely never, ever threaten their friends. Because humans don't forget those who helped them, and their gratitude really can shake worlds. Just ask the hegemony. Oh wait, you can't. They don't exist anymore. The humans made sure of that.